We're not under the old law or a patriarch law or anything else. We are under a law first and foremost. If there were no law, then there would be no sin, because sin is what? Transgression of the law. So there has to be a law because there is sin. We fall from time to time. We fall short for sure. But right here, he's going to talk about how we ought to walk according to God, to please God. Those who do the will of the Father will be saved. Matthew 7:21. So here it is, verse 3. For this is the will of God. Another important phrase. Your sanctification, that you abstain from fornication or sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God. Okay, so it is God's will for his offspring. By the way, how are we his offspring besides creation? Through the blood of Christ. Those who obey him become his children. We are his offspring. We are born of water and of the Spirit, John 3:5. We become his offspring. He has sanctified us. And so it is his will that you and I, as his offspring, live a holy life. To sanctify or sanctified means to set apart. God has set apart you and me for his purpose, for his holy and divine purpose. All right, so there's a Greek word there for sanctification, sanctification. Vine defines it as separation to God. Used 10 times apparently in the Greek New Testament, being translated sanctification 5 times and holiness 5 times. So right here in verse 3, we have the word, that same word, hagiosmos. In verse 3, we have the word sanctification. And then in verse 7, you'll notice the word holiness. It's the same word. Sanctification, holiness. Saints, holy. We are saints. The Bible gives a definition of what sanctification means. So let's look at some verses here. Let's go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. And someone else get Exodus 13:1 and 2. Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. And then Exodus 13, verses 1 and 2.
Wherefore, I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as thorns in your side, and their God shall be a snare unto you.
Dad, you got Exodus chapter 13? That's okay. Exodus chapter 13, verses 1 and 2. I've done that so many times, even in the middle of the sermon, where somebody in the audience went, wrong chapter, right in the middle of my sermon. And I was like, thanks, brother. Exodus chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, and then someone else, Genesis 2 and 3.
And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, it is mine.
So he says, sanctify unto me all the firstborn. He specified what he wanted separated, and then he said for the purpose, he said, it's mine. He sanctifies or sets apart things, and it's for his purpose. Whatever he uses, he separates it from whatever, and he's going to use that for his will, for his purpose. All right, Genesis 2 and 3.
And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God had created to make.
So he separated, sanctified the seventh day. So what is sanctification? What does that even mean? Set apart. He's set apart for his own will. To set apart to God, to be used by him and for him. When you and I, or when a person obeys the gospel, that person is now sanctified. He is now set apart, and he or she is set apart for the purpose of God. Okay? He's supposed to live a holy life. He's supposed to live a life of dedicated service to Him. It's for His purposes. We're not, as saints, we're not to go back to the old life. That would put us back to where we were. Okay? So we can lose our sanctified status. Okay? It can be altered by sin for sure. Now, he says here in verse 3, for this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from fornication. Okay, so in Thessalonica, is that a Gentile nation? Greek nation? Remember how Paul commended them, how they behaved, even though in spite of where they're located? They're around pagans. They're around heathenism. Okay? And in the pagan worship, fornication was part of it. Temptation would come about in that, especially those who had converted out of that mess. Okay? So they are to abstain. They're from a heathen background, and they live in a society that is just indoctrinated in this stuff, in paganism. And so and that's their old life, you think they would be tempted to do that again, yes or no? Those who are recovering alcoholics, those who were alcoholics, and then they put off the old man, and they abstain from the drink, do you not think that at times they may think about, I might want to take a sip? Those who have quit smoking, the temptation's there. They have that craving there. Same thing here. He says, he's telling them, your sanctification, that number one, you abstain from sexual immorality. And then look at number 4, that each one of you know how to control his own body or vessel in holiness and honor. Okay, so we've got vessel here, which refers to a physical body. And I love how he says that every one of you should know how to possess it or take control of it. We have fleshly appetites, don't we? We do. We're made that way. But also, what do we have? Self-control. Okay? We're motivated to control our fleshly appetites. We should know how to do that. How would we know how to do that? If we ain't nothing but animals, we wouldn't know, right? We did not evolve from a monkey, regardless what so-called scientists say. This is what separates us from the animal kingdom. We have a conscience. We have self-control. We can abstain from this. If we could not abstain for it, then why would he even give us the exhortation? Am I right? So, right here, we have to control. Now, this also implies something, that it's going to take effort. It's going to take a conscious decision. We've already decided before the temptation even comes that we are not going to do that. And that's when the decision needs to come. We can't wait until the temptation comes. We've already have it in our mind. You ought to know how to control your fleshly appetites, to control your vessel. You ought to know how to abstain from that. Well, people would have a hard time abstaining from it if they keep putting themselves in situations to where it comes to them, right?
What I think is so interesting is we're embarking upon some strange times in our society. I mean, where we can't identify what a male or a female is, or there's some crazy things happening even into the future here. And what I think is so interesting is, it's not just that he says sexual immorality, and he makes it explicit in what he's saying, or adultery. He then comes in, Paul, and he makes it plain and simple, and he's saying, talking about us controlling our own bodies in holiness and honor, which covers a whole multitude of
Yeah.
things.
Certainly.
So instead of specifically saying something, now he comes in and he talks about that, because we could go, our time, we're hitting, like I said, some strange things are coming, and they have been, but here it talks about you can control your body and your mind in the holiness and in honor, where he makes it clear as a bell, no matter what, you are in control of your body, and you can do it.
Yeah.
No matter what sin it is.
Yes. And we need to train our children and not be afraid to talk to them about stuff like this, and especially don't rely on the schools to teach them stuff like this. I don't know if this is true or not. I don't know 100% because I got this from a third party. But apparently Giles County Elementary Schools passed out something today about gender, sex, and identity. Pamphlets
It's
from
time for us to stop that, though.
from Old Spice. Yeah.
It needs to be stopped.
Yeah. And so when these kids are growing up, they're going to be around this mess here. And if we don't speak up to that, if we don't teach them ourselves and tell them, look, this is not right. This is unscientific. This is absolutely outrageous. So y'all might want to ask questions. I don't know, but I just got that.
If we don't explicitly make sure that we've got Genesis 1:27 marked that identifies who we are created after, and identifies that there is only two sexes, it's never before I have thought that we would have to define
Mm-hmm.
that there's just a male and a female. You know, there's all this he, him, she, you name it. There's all these things. But Genesis 1:27 is explicit. It says that who we are created in the image of God, and that there's just a male and a female, and that's it.
I hope this isn't true, but I've got a picture of the pamphlet. I got a picture of the pamphlet, a few definitions: biological sex based on your physical, what you were born with; gender identity, it's about how you feel.
The saddest part about all this is to a elementary school child, this shouldn't even be something that has to be talked about.
Here, this also says, don't let society limit you. It's encouraging, that stuff. If I were y'all, I would look that up. I don't know. I didn't receive the pamphlet, just pictures of the pamphlet. So I don't want to
Well,
say.
we've got a guy, I don't know if y'all know him, I don't know him well, his name's Barry, and he's running for school board this time. And he's a retired attorney from Indiana somewhere. I talked to him for a long time, and he seems like he knows what he's talking about. But he says this can be stopped, this can be changed. We don't have to do it.
Mm-hmm.
We need to put, and I know Matt's running for county commissioner, we need to elect people like Clay and Pavelski and everybody we can that's members of the church. We need to get on these boards and on these commissions and get this thing.
That's certainly one way. That's certainly one way to help that. It certainly is. But also, we need to be Christians. We need to be preaching the truth. That's the number one thing. But you're right too. The Christian in the voting booth, there's definitely a significance there. God gave us government, and we ought to take care of it. But
Dr. Beasley told her like a week ago, Doc Savage, that he had delivered like hundreds of babies. He's never had a problem defining what they were, boy or girl.
well, he certainly earned his PhD then. Good deal. Okay, I'm sorry I didn't mean to jump on that, but I got that text literally right before class, and you brought that up. But just to tell y'all, this is in Giles County. This is in our backyard, and I would ask questions if that's the case. All right, so let's look at this for a second here about our physical bodies, how that we must keep them in subjection. It takes effort. Let's look at some verses here. Someone get the following, please. 1 Corinthians 9 and verse 27. Romans 8, 5 through 7. And then on the same chapter of Romans 8, verses 12 and 13. 1 Corinthians 9, 27, Romans 8, 5 through 7, Romans 8, 12 through 13.
But I keep under my body and bring it unto subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway.
Yeah, so Paul here, he says, I keep my body. I keep it. That's his effort. I keep my body. I keep under my body and bring it into subjection. If I'm preaching one thing and I'm behaving fleshly, I'm going to be a castaway. Okay? We can keep it under subjection. Abstain from anything that would tempt us to not do so. Okay? Who's got Romans 8, 5 through 7?
Those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh. Those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Because the carnal mind is enmity against God, for it is not subject to the law of God, nor indeed can be.
That's right. Who's got 12 and 13? Same chapter. Just go down to verse 12 and read that in 13.
So then, brethren, we are under obligation not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you are living according to the flesh, you must die. But if by the Spirit you are putting to death the deeds of the body, you will live.
You will live. See, that's the thing there. We are at war with our flesh all the time because we do have those temptations. We have those appetites. But if we are spiritually minded and not carnally minded, that spiritual mind, meaning that I'm learned what God wants me to do, what it takes to please Him, to do His will, to fight these urges, to go ahead and make the decision, I'm not going to do that, then I'm going to live. That's the purpose here. Okay, so we just got to abstain from things like that. Going back to verse 4 in chapter 4 of 1 Thessalonians, each one of you know how to control. Okay, it's not rocket science. It's not something that's just out there. No one could say, well, I can't help it. I've got this nature. No, you don't. You do not. You have a brain. God gave you self-control. We cannot use the excuse, well, I'm just human. Sometimes people say that. We're human and we make mistakes, which is true, but some people say, well, I'm human, and use it as an excuse to make a quote unquote excuse. Does that make any sense to sin? They're okay with it. It doesn't bother their conscience, and they'll say, well, I'm only human. You can't judge me. We're not trying to judge anybody. We're just trying to help people get to heaven, plain and simple. And we must do the will of the Father in order to be saved. It's His will that we are sanctified and holy for His purpose. And if I'm going to be sanctified and holy for His purpose, I cannot submit to the flesh. I can't. If I do, I've chosen my reward, I guess you could say. Unfortunately, it's temporary and won't get me anywhere. That's it. Or I can submit to God and I can have eternal pleasure, eternal bliss, and live. It takes effort on our parts. That includes a lot of things, and he's going to get into that here. Verse 6, that no man go beyond and defraud his brother in any manner. Let's see. Oh, I forgot verse 5, didn't I? Look at me. No, we did verse 5. No, I didn't do verse 5. Not in the passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God. Those who have the King James Version, not in the lust of concupiscence, even as the Gentiles which know not God. You know, concupiscence. People look at, generally speaking, you know, the Church of Christ, we're strict. We're just strict. It's because we're trying to abstain from temptation. high school dances and things like that. When you're in a room and it's dark and there's hardly any chaperones there, that's concupiscence. I heard one of my instructors gave an illustration to a youth group one time, and they were concerned. They were like, "Why can't we do dances or anything like that?" He said, "You're trying to abstain from temptation, but we're just dancing. We're just having fun." He said to one boy, said, "You stand up," and he pointed to another boy, "You stand up. Now you two dance together." What do you think they did? Ooh, no! And then he goes, "But I thought you said it was just fun," right? A lady and a man together dancing. There could be some things that pop up that could lead to other things. Some people may think that's just far-fetched, whatever. But I know that I was a teenage boy one time, okay? That's just how it is. This is a time where people need to learn about what we're talking about here, how we should know how to keep our body into subjection, okay? Yeah.
So you be the one that leads them into temptation. I've heard or seen many times where, that people want to dress a certain way, and modesty comes into question. But the question that we need to be asking ourselves too is am I going to lead someone into sin by how I am?
Sure.
So it's we need to be looking after our brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah. Right. And that reminds me, sometimes when you preach a sermon, you go back and say, "Oh, I should have said that," And I'm thinking about the sermon about where Shem and Japheth were walking backwards toward Noah, their father, because he was uncovered, right? How many people go through that daily when they see somebody that's uncovered? And I'm not talking about completely nude. Somebody could sit in a position that could unintentionally be immodest. Those things happen. What are we going to do about it? Are we going to do like what Ham did and look and then tell other people, or even dive and soak in that thought? Or are we going to avert our eyes away? What are we going to do? We go through that temptation daily. I feel funny saying stuff like that because I'm up here preaching the Bible or talking about the Bible, but it's just a fact of life. It just really is. Yeah. That's exactly right. When you get
I find it interesting that of all the things he could have told them that the will of God was, he says abstain from sexual immorality. It reminds me of, if you remember the Jerusalem Council about circumcision, what was in the letter that they sent out? Abstain from blood, things strangled, sexual immorality.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is very high on God's list of something to avoid.
Absolutely, because it's the easiest to fall into, I bet. Absolutely, because
this is not insignificant that he mentions. It's not just another.
It's not just a suggestion, Absolutely, very good. This is very significant, and he's talking to his brethren that's right in the middle of it. They're seeing it constantly. They used to be a part of it. They used to take part in this stuff. They've converted out of that mess, and so abstain, control your bodies, because you know how. How do you do that? You avoid things that would bring temptation to your life. A lot harder to do than to say, isn't it? Certainly is. All right, verse 6. That no one transgress and wrong his brother in this matter, because the Lord is an avenger in all these things, as we told you beforehand and solemnly warned you. So he's not only discussing fornication and sinful lust here, but he's also dealing with fraudulent conduct. God's people are supposed to be different from those who are ruled by physical desires. Men of this world defraud one another. They find ways to defraud and stretch the truth. Do we not know that today for sure? Where they take video clips and take them out of context and make people just look terrible. That happens a lot, doesn't it? Whatever the reason is, it happens. Some people try to defraud others to get a deal out of something. Or some people lie about what they're selling and get more than what they actually deserve. There's all kinds of reasons to defraud. But Christians, we're supposed to treat other people the way they want to be treated. Right? Anybody know the verse, the golden rule? Matthew 7:12. Matthew 7:12. Therefore, all things whatever you do that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. For this is the law and the prophets, the golden rule. It's really simple. Treat others how you want to be treated. Do you want to be hoodooed? Then don't hoodoo other people. Right? It's really simple. You want people lying about you? No, then you don't lie about other people. You can do this. You control this. There's a temptation here. He says, to transgress is to go beyond the limits of God's will. Whoever commits sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is the transgression of the law. 1 John 3:4. So we must not violate any commandment or truth given in this inspired word. No transgression. No one transgression, and wrong his brother in this matter. Paul reminds them that he has forewarned them and had given them inspired testimony regarding these matters. He saw fit to remind them. Remember, I've already taught you about these things beforehand. But does that mean you stop teaching it? Well, Peter discusses that, doesn't he? That he wants to bring things to remembrance. So let's read, somebody get 1 Peter 1:12 and 13, and someone else, same book, 2 Peter, but read chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. 2 Peter 1:12 and 13, and 2 Peter 3, 1 and 2.
For this reason, I will not be negative to remind you always of these things, though you know and are established in the present truth. Yes, I think it is right, as long as I am in this tent, to stir you up. I remind you.
To stir you up, man. Let me remind you of what God has to say about this. That may stir some people up, especially if they've fallen astray. All right, who's got chapter 3, verses 1 and 2?
That was 2 Peter.
2 Peter 3, 1 and 2.
The second epistle, beloved, I now write unto you in both, which I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance, that ye may be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets, and of the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior.
It's good to keep things in remembrance, and sometimes it does stir us up. We need to be stirred up into remembrance. Remember that God told you to act this way. Remember that God said abstain from fornication. Remember that Jesus said, except for fornication. If a man put away his wife, and marry another, that wife, Matthew 19:9, I butchered that, but you know what I mean. Marriage, divorce, and remarriage. Let me stir you up into remembrance of what God has to say about that. Very important to do that for remembrance. That's why we ought to be looking in the Word every day, and we're not just dependent on 3 or 4 hours in the week for our scriptural education. We must keep at it. And he says right here, he's affirming them, he's remembering them, he's telling them, look, Remember, the Lord is the avenger of such. People get away with stuff today, don't they? Justice system, would you say it's fair? Are some laws applicable to you and me, and that are not applicable to others? Constantly. We see it all the time. There's a lot of protests going on right now in front of the Supreme Court justice trying to stir their decision. That's illegal. Nobody's going to stir God's decision. Nobody's going to change God's mind. That's the point. God is always right. Our minds need to be stirred up in remembrance of that. God is the avenger of those people. He will avenge you and me, those who persecuted you and me or done me wrong or defrauded us. We must keep that in mind. Sometimes people lie about us and we do everything we can to get back at them. Abstain from that as well. Not only from sexual immorality, but also trying to avenge yourself. God is our avenger. And if we do that, we are doing the very thing that pleases God, His will. Those who do the will of the Father will be saved. Again, it takes effort, don't it? Got to stay strong. Any questions or comments? All right, Lord willing, we'll continue this discussion next Wednesday.